Welcome to Marple Parlor, where Miss Marple elegantly solves timeless mysteries.
In the shadowed halls of Greystone Manor, a single teacup stain holds the key to a chilling murder. Sir Henry Ashford lies dead, a dagger in his heart, and Miss Jane Marple, with her keen eye and quiet wisdom, unravels a web of deceit. Who laced the tea with poison? Why do 3 cups bear the same sinister mark? As love, greed, and betrayal collide, can you guess the killer before the truth spills out? Step into Agatha Christie's world of suspense, where no secret stays hidden for long. Chapter 1. The Gathering at Greystone Manor. The late summer sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Greystone Manor, a sprawling estate nestled in the heart of St. Mary Mead's countryside. The manor, with its ivy-clad walls and mullioned windows, exuded an air of timeless elegance, though its owner, Sir Henry Ashford, was known to be less refined than his home. Sir Henry, a retired industrialist with a penchant for lavish parties, had invited a select group to his annual summer gathering, a weekend of bridge, gossip, and fine dining. The village of St. Mary Mead buzzed with anticipation, for Sir Henry's gatherings were legendary, not least for the undercurrents of tension that simmered beneath the polished surface. Miss Jane Marple, a slight figure in a tweed skirt and lavender cardigan, sat quietly in the corner of the drawing room, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. Her friend, Mrs. Dolly Bantry, had persuaded her to attend, insisting that a weekend away would do her good. "Jane, you must come," Dolly had said, her eyes twinkling. Sir Henry's guests are always such a curious mix, bound to be something to pique your interest. Miss Marple, ever observant, had agreed, though she suspected the weekend would offer more than mere entertainment. The drawing room was abuzz with conversation. Sir Henry, a portly man with a booming voice, held court near the fireplace, regaling his guests with tales of his latest investments. His wife, Lady Margaret Ashford, a striking woman in her 40s, with sharp green eyes, moved gracefully among the guests, ensuring their glasses were filled. Their daughter, Cecilia Ashford, a nervous young woman of 22, fidgeted with her pearl necklace, her gaze darting to the door as if expecting an unwelcome arrival. Among the guests was Mr. Lionel Drake, a solicitor with a pinched face and a reputation for discretion, who seemed unduly preoccupied with his pocket watch. Mrs. Evelyn Carver, a glamorous widow with a penchant for sapphires, laughed too loudly at Sir Henry's jokes, her eyes calculating. Captain Roger Blake, a dashing naval officer on leave, leaned against the mantelpiece, his charm masking a certain restlessness. Lastly, there was Dr. Thomas Hayworth, the local physician, whose quiet whispered, "What a collection, Jane. I swear there's enough intrigue here to fill a novel." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her eyes scanning the room. She noted the way Cecilia avoided her mother's gaze, the slight tremor in Mr. Drake's hand as he checked his watch, and the curious way Mrs. Carver's smile faltered when Captain Blake spoke. "People are so very revealing, Dolly," she murmured, her needles never pausing. "One only needs to watch." The evening proceeded with a sumptuous dinner, served in the grand dining room. The table gleamed with silver and crystal, and the conversation flowed as freely as the wine. Sir Henry dominated, his voice carrying over the clink of cutlery. "I've a surprise for tomorrow," he announced, his eyes glinting. "A little announcement that will shake things up." The guests exchanged glances, some curious, others uneasy. Cecilia dropped her fork, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. After dinner, the party retired to the drawing room for coffee and bridge. Miss Marple, declining to play, settled into an armchair with her knitting, her eyes flitting from one guest to another. She noticed a teacup left on a side table near Cecilia's chair, with a faint brown stain on its rim. Not the usual mark of tea or coffee, but something darker, almost reddish. It was an odd detail, one that most would overlook, but Miss Marple's mind lingered on it. Curious, she thought, her fingers pausing briefly. As the clock struck 10, Sir Henry rose, bidding the guests good night. "Rest well," he said, with a theatrical flourish. "Tomorrow will be a day to remember." The guests dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the marble corridors. Miss Marple, escorted by Dolly, retired to her room, her mind already piecing together the fragments of the evening. The teacup stain, Cecilia's nervousness, Sir Henry's cryptic announcement. These were threads in a tapestry yet to be woven. In the quiet of her room, Miss Marple sat by the window, gazing at the moonlit gardens. "Something is amiss, Dolly," she said softly, though her friend was already asleep in the next room. "And I fear it will not end well." The night was still, but the air held a promise of disruption, as if the manor itself were holding its breath. Chapter 2. The Shadow Falls. The scream shattered the morning calm, piercing through the heavy oak doors of Greystone Manor. It was just past 7 o'clock, and the household was stirring, the maids bustling with trays of tea and toast. Miss Marple, already dressed and sipping her morning tea, paused, her cup halfway to her lips. The scream came again, high and frantic, from the direction of the library. She set her cup down and moved swiftly, her age no hindrance.
See.
The library door stood ajar, and a small crowd had gathered, maids, a footman, and Mrs. Carver, her face pale beneath her rouge. Inside, Sir Henry Ashford lay slumped in an armchair by the fireplace, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. A small, ornate dagger protruded from his chest, its handle gleaming in the morning light. Blood had soaked his waistcoat, pooling on the Persian rug beneath him. Cecilia stood frozen near the door, her hands pressed to her mouth, her earlier scream now reduced to a whimper. Miss Marple's eyes swept the room, taking in every detail. The open window, the scattered papers on the desk, the untouched glass of brandy on the side table. And there, on the same table, was another teacup, identical to the one she had noticed the previous evening, with a similar reddish-brown stain on its rim. She filed the observation away, her face impassive. Dr. Hayworth pushed through the crowd, his medical bag in hand. He knelt beside Sir Henry, checking for a pulse, though the outcome was clear. "He's been dead for hours," he said grimly. "Likely since midnight. The dagger went straight to the heart." Lady Margaret appeared, her composure fraying at the edges. "Henry!" she gasped, catching the doorframe. "Who could have done this?" Her eyes darted to Cecilia, who flinched as if struck. The local constable, Mr. Pork, arrived within the hour, followed by Inspector Craddock from Scotland Yard, a familiar face to Miss Marple. Craddock, a man of steady demeanour, surveyed the scene with practised efficiency. "No one leaves the manor," he declared. "This is a murder, and everyone here is a suspect." The guests were ushered to the drawing-room, where tension hung like a fog. Captain Blake paced, his jaw tight. Mr. Drake sat rigidly, his hands clasped. Mrs. Carver dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, though Miss Marple noted the absence of tears. Clara Hayworth clung to her husband, whispering anxiously. Cecilia, pale and trembling, sat alone, her eyes fixed on the floor. Miss Marple, seated in her usual corner, resumed her knitting, her ears attuned to every word. Inspector Craddock began his preliminary questions, establishing alibis. Sir Henry had been seen alive at 10 o'clock the previous evening, retiring to the library to review some papers. The household had gone to bed, and no one admitted to seeing him after that. I was in my room by 10:30, Lady Margaret said, a voice steady. I heard nothing unusual. I retired at 11, Captain Blake offered. Slept like a log. Mr. Drake claimed to have been reading until midnight, alone in his room. Mrs. Carver said she had taken a sleeping draught and heard nothing.
Hesitations. Cecilia's alibi was vague, and Mr. Drake's insistence on checking his watch last night now seemed significant. And the teacup stain, why did it appear again in the very room where Sir Henry had died? As Craddock continued his inquiries, Miss Marple's mind worked quietly. A murder is never simple, she thought. It is a puzzle of human hearts, and the pieces are already before us. We need only to see them clearly. Extract 1918. Miss Marple, seated near the window, with a view of the rose garden, fidgeted with her gloves, her usual buoyancy subdued. Jane, it's dreadful, she whispered to Miss Marple, who sat beside her, knitting with her customary calm. Poor Sir Henry, stabbed like that, and in his own library. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, flicked up from her needles. Indeed, Dolly, but it is not the dagger that interests me most. It is the why and the how and the who, of course. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the murmur of the room, but Dolly knew that tone. It was the sound of Miss Marple's mind at work, sifting through the ordinary to find the extraordinary. Inspector Craddock had been called away to confer with the coroner, leaving Constable Pork to guard the door. The guests, restless under confinement, exchanged wary glances. Lady Margaret, dressed in sombre black, sat rigidly on a sofa, her hands folded in her lap. Cecilia, her daughter, hovered nearby, her face pale and her fingers twisting a handkerchief. Captain Roger Blake leaned against the mantelpiece, his charm replaced by a brooding intensity. Mr. Lionel Drake, the solicitor, scribbled notes in a small leather-bound book, his lips pursed. Mrs. Evelyn Carver, her sapphire earrings catching the light, sipped her tea with an air of detachment, though her eyes darted to the others. Dr. Thomas Hayworth and his wife Clara sat close together, whispering in low tones. Miss Marple, unnoticed by most, observed them all. She noted the way Lady Margaret's gaze lingered on Captain Blake, the slight tremor in Cecilia's hands, and the curious way Mr. Drake's pen paused whenever Mrs. Carver spoke. But her mind kept returning to the teacup in the library, the one with the reddish-brown stain, identical to the one she had seen the previous evening. It was a small thing, easily overlooked, but Miss Marple knew that small things often held great truths. Dolly, she murmured, do you recall the teacup on the side table last night, near Cecilia's chair? It had an odd stain, did it not? Dolly frowned, trying to remember. A teacup? Oh, Jane, I hardly notice such things. But yes, I suppose there was one. Why does it matter? Miss Marple's needles clicked rhythmically. It matters because there was another in the library beside Sir Henry's body, and both had the same peculiar stain, not tea, not coffee, but something else. It is a curious coincidence, don't you think? Before Dolly could respond, the door opened, and Inspector Craddock returned, his expression grim. I've spoken with the coroner, he announced. Sir Henry died between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., likely closer to midnight. The dagger was a decorative piece from the library mantelpiece, easily accessible to anyone in the house. We've found no fingerprints, which suggests the killer was careful. A murmur rippled through the room. Lady Margaret's lips tightened, and Cecilia let out a small gasp. Captain Blake's hand twitched, as if resisting the urge to reach for something. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, noting each reaction. Craddock continued, I'll need to speak with each of you again, individually. There are inconsistencies in your statements, and I intend to get to the bottom of them.
He glanced at Miss Marple, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He had worked with her before, and knew her unassuming demeanor hid a formidable mind. "Miss Marple, perhaps you'd care to join us? Your perspective is always valuable." Miss Marple inclined her head modestly. "I am happy to assist, Inspector, in my small way." Dolly stifled a smile. She knew there was nothing small about Jane Marple's abilities. The interviews began in the morning room, a smaller space with tall windows overlooking the lawn. Craddock sat at a mahogany desk, a notebook open before him, while Miss Marple took a seat in the corner, her knitting in her lap. Dolly, allowed to stay as Miss Marple's companion, perched on a chair nearby, her eyes wide with curiosity. Lady Margaret was the first to be questioned. She entered with the poise of a woman accustomed to command, though her hands betrayed a slight tremor. "I told you, Inspector," she said, her voice cool. "I retired at 10:30 and heard nothing. Henry often worked late in the library. It was his habit." "And you heard no disturbances?" Craddock pressed. "No voices, no footsteps?" "None," she replied firmly. "The manor is large and my room is on the opposite wing." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Lady Margaret," she said gently, "forgive an old woman's curiosity, but did Sir Henry seem troubled last night? His announcement about a surprise was rather cryptic, was it not?" Lady Margaret's eyes flickered. "Henry was always dramatic. He likely meant some business venture." Her nervousness palpable. I went to bed early," she stammered. "I had a headache. I didn't see Father after dinner." "And you heard nothing in the night?" Craddock asked. Cecilia shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "No, nothing. I wish I had. I might have saved him." Miss Marple's voice was soft. "My dear, that teacup near your chair last night, did you drink from it? It had such an unusual stain." Cecilia blinked, startled. I don't remember. I might have had tea, but I was so tired I don't know about any stain." The interviews continued. Captain Blake claimed to have slept soundly, though his eyes avoided Craddock's. Mr. Drake repeated his alibi of reading until midnight, his tone defensive. Mrs. Carver admitted to taking a sleeping draught, but mentioned hearing a creak or two around 11, which she dismissed as the house settling. Dr. Hayworth and Clara confirmed their shared alibi, though Clara's voice trembled as she spoke. As the interviews concluded, Miss Marple's mind was a whirl of details. The teacup stain, Sir Henry's announcement, Cecilia's nervousness, Lady Margaret's composure, all were pieces of a puzzle. She thought of her friend, Mrs. Price, back in St. Mary Mead, who had once left a lipstick-stained teacup on a table, claiming it was just a habit. Could the stain be lipstick? No, it was too dark, too uneven. Perhaps something else, a chemical, a medicine, a poison. "Dolly," she said, as they returned to the drawing room, "we must keep our eyes open. The truth is here, in the small things, a stain, a glance, a word out of place. They will lead us to the killer." Dolly shivered. "Jane, you make it sound so simple, but it's all so dreadful. Who could have hated Sir Henry enough to do this?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "That, my dear Dolly, is what we shall discover. And I suspect the answer lies not in hate, but in something far more complicated." Ars Tradi, word count 1980. To continue, please say, continue with Chapter 4. Chapter 4. The questions begin. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Greystone Manor, casting a golden glow over the drawing room where the guests remained under Inspector Craddock's watchful eye. The air was thick with unease, the polite veneer of the previous evening replaced by a palpable tension. Dolly Bantry, seated beside Miss Marple, twisted her handkerchief, her eyes darting from one guest to another. "Jane, It's like sitting in a cage with a pack of nervous cats, she whispered. Everyone's watching everyone else, and no one's saying what they really think. Miss Marple's knitting needles moved steadily, her expression serene, but her eyes sharp as they scanned the room. People always reveal themselves. Stains, first by Cecilia's chair, then in the library beside Sir Henry's body. The reddish-brown mark was no ordinary residue, and Miss Marple's thoughts circled around its possible significance. Was it a clue to the method of murder, or a sign of something else entirely? Inspector Craddock, having completed his initial interviews, now began a more thorough investigation. He had set up a makeshift office in the morning room, and one by one the guests were summoned for further questioning. Miss Marple, with Craddock's tacit approval, accompanied him, her presence unassuming but her observations keen. Dolly, ever eager to be near the action, followed, her curiosity barely contained. The first to be questioned again was Captain Roger Blake, whose naval uniform seemed less dashing in the harsh light of scrutiny. He sat with a forced nonchalance, one leg crossed over the other, but his fingers drummed lightly on the armrest. "I've told you, Inspector," he said, his tone clipped. "I was in my room by 11, asleep by past. I heard nothing, saw nothing." Craddock leaned forward, his notebook open. "And you had no dealings with Sir Henry that evening? No private conversations, no disagreements?" Blake's jaw tightened. "None. We played bridge, had a drink, and that was that. Sir Henry was in high spirits, talking about his big announcement." Miss Marple's voice, soft and deferential, cut through the silence. "Captain Blake, forgive an old woman's curiosity, but I noticed you seemed rather restless last night during bridge. Was something troubling you?" Blake's eyes flickered, but he recovered quickly. "Restless? Not at all, Miss Marple. Just the usual boredom of a long evening. I'm a man of action, not cards." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking. She noted the slight flush on his cheeks, the way his hand clenched briefly. "Of course," she said mildly, "one does tire of bridge." Next came Mr. Lionel Drake, the solicitor, whose pinched face and nervous manner seemed more pronounced today. He clutched his pocket watch, checking it twice during the brief walk to the morning room. "I've nothing to add, Inspector," he said before Craddock could speak. "I was reading in my room until midnight, as I said. I heard no disturbances." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Drake, Sir Henry's papers in the library were in disarray. As his solicitor, can you confirm what he was working on? He mentioned a surprise, perhaps a change to his will." Drake's fingers tightened around his watch. I'm not at liberty to discuss Sir Henry's affairs, but I can assure you nothing was finalized. He often spoke of grand plans that came to nothing." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Mr. Drake, I couldn't help but notice you checked your watch several times last night. Were you expecting someone, perhaps?" Drake blinked, caught off guard. "Expecting someone? No. No, it's just a habit. I like to keep to a schedule." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle, but her eyes alert. She thought of Mr. Jenkins, the village grocer in St. Mary Mead, who checked his watch obsessively when hiding a delivery of contraband tobacco. Habits, she knew, often masked deeper truths. Mrs. Evelyn Carver was next, her sapphire earrings glinting as she settled into the chair. She exuded confidence, but Miss Marple noted the careful way she arranged her skirt, as if buying time. "Inspector, I've told you everything," she said, her voice smooth. "I took a sleeping draught at 10:30 and was out like a light. I heard nothing until the scream this morning." Craddock tapped his pencil. "You mentioned hearing creaks around 11. Could you be more specific?" Mrs. Carver's smile was tight. "Old houses creak, Inspector. It was nothing out of the ordinary. I dismissed it and went to sleep." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Mrs. Carver, that lovely teacup you used last night, did you notice anything unusual about it? A stain, perhaps? Mrs. Carver's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. A stain? I don't recall. I drank my tea and left the cup on the table. Why do you ask? Oh, no reason, Miss Marple said airily. Just an old woman's fancy for details. As the interviews continued, Dr. Hayworth and Clara provided little new information, their alibis intertwined. Cecilia, however, was a bundle of nerves, her answers halting. I didn't see Father after dinner, she repeated. I went to bed at 10. I was unwell. And the teacup by your chair? Miss Marple asked gently. Did you drink from it, my dear? Cecilia's hands trembled. I think so. I don't remember. I was so tired. Miss Marple exchanged a glance with Craddock, who nodded slightly. The teacup was becoming a focal point, though its significance remained elusive. After the interviews, Craddock allowed Miss Marple to examine the library, accompanied by Dolly and Constable Pork. The room was as it had been, Sir Henry's body removed, but the dagger, papers, and teacup untouched. Miss Marple knelt by the side table, peering at the cup. The stain was indeed reddish-brown, not quite like lipstick or tea. She sniffed it cautiously, detecting a faint metallic odor. Dolly, she said, does this remind you of anything? A medicine, perhaps, or a chemical? Dolly wrinkled her nose. It's odd, Jane. Like something from a chemist's shop. But why would a teacup have such a stain? Miss Marple straightened, her mind arguing in hushed tones near the fireplace, their voices sharp. You promised me, Roger, Lady Margaret hissed. You said it would be settled. Blake's reply was inaudible, but his expression was dark. Miss Marple filed the exchange away, her suspicion growing. Dolly, she whispered, we must watch closely. The truth is beginning to surface, but it is tangled in lies. Dolly shivered. Jane, you're giving me the creeps. Do you think one of them did it? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Oh, my dear, I think many things, but we must be patient. The teacup will tell us more in time. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The atmosphere in Greystone Manor grew heavier as the day wore on, the weight of Sir Henry Ashford's murder pressing down on its inhabitants. The drawing room, once a stage for polite conversation, now felt like a chessboard where every move was scrutinized. Dolly Bantry, seated near Miss Marple, clutched her tea saucer, her eyes flitting nervously between the guests. Jane, it's unbearable, she whispered. Everyone's acting as if they're hiding something. I swear I saw Captain Blake glaring at Mr. Drake just now. Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked with their usual rhythm, but her gaze was sharp, missing nothing. People under pressure reveal their true natures, Dolly, she murmured. And in a murder case, the guilty often try to point the finger elsewhere. We must watch for the distractions. Her mind lingered on the teacup stains. She suspected they held the key to the crime, but the puzzle was far from complete. Inspector Craddock, methodical as ever, had shifted his focus to the physical evidence. He had summoned the household staff to the morning room for questioning, leaving the guests to stew in their unease. The butler, Mr. Grayson, a stooped man with a deferential air, reported that the library door had been locked at 10:30, as was Sir Henry's custom when working late. No one entered after that, sir, Grayson said, his voice steady. I checked the door myself at 11. And the window, Craddock pressed. Closed and latched, sir, Grayson replied. I saw to it before retiring. This detail intrigued Miss Marple. The library window had been open when Sir Henry's body was discovered, suggesting the killer had either entered or exited that way, or wanted it to appear so. She made a mental note to inspect the window more closely, but her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion in the drawing room. Captain Roger Blake, his face flushed, was arguing with Constable Polk. "I tell you, I saw something last night," Blake insisted, his voice carrying. "Around 11, I looked out my window and saw a figure near the library. It was dark, but I'm certain it was a man." The guests turned. Margaret's eyes narrowed, and Mr. Drake's pen froze mid-sentence. Cecilia, seated in a corner, clutched her handkerchief, her face pale. Mrs. Carver raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical, while Dr. Hayworth exchanged a glance with his wife Clara, who looked as if she might faint. Craddock, summoned by the outburst, strode into the room. "Captain Blake, you didn't mention this earlier. Describe this figure." Blake hesitated, his confidence wavering. "It was shadowy. Tall, I think. Moving quickly toward the garden. I couldn't see the face." Miss Marple's needles paused. She thought of young Tommy Pierce in St. Mary Mead, who once claimed to have seen a ghost in the churchyard, only to admit later it was a neighbor sneaking home after a late night. "Captain Blake," she said gently, "your room faces the east wing, does it not? The library is on the west side. How could you see the library window from your room?" Blake blinked, caught off guard. I meant the garden path near the library. I saw the figure there." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone mild but her eyes keen. She suspected Blake's story was a fabrication, designed to divert suspicion. But to whom? And why? Craddock, sensing the same, pressed further. "This figure, did it carry anything? A weapon, perhaps?" Blake shook his head. "It was too dark to tell. I only saw the movement." The inspector made a note, his expression unreadable. "We'll search the grounds again. If there was an intruder, there may be footprints." He turned to the group. "If anyone else saw anything unusual, now is the time to speak." Silence followed, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock. Miss Marple noted the way Mr. Drake avoided Blake's gaze, the slight tremor in Cecilia's hands, and the calculated neutrality of Mrs. Carver's expression. Lady Margaret, however, spoke up. "Inspector, this talk of shadowy figures is nonsense. The killer is in this house. I suggest you look at motives. Henry had enemies, business rivals perhaps, or—" She paused, her eyes flicking to Cecilia. "Or personal grievances." Cecilia gasped, her face crumpling. "Mother, how can you say that? I loved father." Lady Margaret's lips tightened, but she said nothing more. Miss Marple's mind whirred. The accusation, veiled as it was, suggested a rift between mother and daughter. Could it be related to Sir Henry's surprise announcement? And what of the teacup stains? She resolved to examine the cups again, if Craddock would allow it. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple and Dolly accompanied Craddock to the library, where the crime scene remained undisturbed. The dagger, now in police custody, had left a dark stain on the rug. The papers on the desk were a jumble of financial documents, but one caught Miss Marple's eye, a draft of a codicil trust. But the details were vague. She filed this away, her thoughts returning to the teacup on the side table. "Inspector," she said, "might I examine the cup more closely? It has a curious stain, much like one I saw in the drawing room." Craddock nodded, accustomed to Miss Marple's uncanny knack for details. "Go ahead, Miss Marple, but it's likely just tea." Miss Marple peered at the cup, noting the same reddish-brown mark, faintly metallic in scent. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead where a gardener used a similar cup to mix a pesticide, leaving a residue not unlike this. Could the stain be a poison, administered before the stabbing? But why 2 cups? And why in different rooms? "Dolly," she murmured, "this stain is no accident. It's a thread in the tapestry, but we must find where it leads." Dolly shivered. Jane, you make it sound so sinister. Do you think it's poison? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. I think many things, Dolly, but we must not jump to conclusions. The truth lies in the details. As they left the library, Miss Marple overheard a whispered conversation between Dr. Hayworth and Clara near the staircase. You mustn't say anything, Clara hissed, her voice barely audible. It's too dangerous. Dr. Hayworth's reply was sharp. I know my duty, Clara. But if they find out... Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, masking her interest. The Hayworths, she thought, were hiding something, just as Blake's story seemed designed to mislead. The red herrings were multiplying, but Miss Marple knew the truth would emerge from the contradictions. She thought of the teacup stains, the open window, the unsigned codicil. Each was a piece of the puzzle, and she was determined to fit them together. As evening approached, Craddock announced that the grounds had been searched, but no footprints were found near the library window. Blake's story was looking flimsier by the hour. Miss Marple, however, was more interested in the guests' reactions. Mr. Drake's nervous tick with his watch had intensified, and Mrs. Carver's smiles were growing forced. Cecilia, meanwhile, had retreated into silence, her eyes haunted. Dolly, Miss Marple said as they prepared for dinner, we are close to something important. The killer is clever, but they cannot hide forever. The teacup will tell us, if we listen. Dolly shook her head. Jane, I don't know how you stay so calm. I feel like I'm in one of those dreadful detective novels, waiting for the next awful thing to happen. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Life, my dear, is often like a novel, but the ending is always logical if one knows where to look. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The evening replaced by strained glances and fidgeting hands. Dolly Bantry, perched on a velvet settee beside Miss Marple, clutched her shawl, her nerves frayed by the day's events. Jane, it's like living in a nightmare, she whispered. All these people pretending to be civil when one of them is a murderer. Miss Marple's knitting needles moved with their steady rhythm, a counterpoint to the tension in the room. Nightmares, Dolly, are often dispelled by a single ray of light, she murmured, and I believe we are close to finding that light. Her mind was fixed on the teacup stains, those curious reddish-brown marks on the cups in the drawing room and the library. They were no mere coincidence, she was certain, but a clue to the method or motive of Sir Henry Ashford's murder. She thought of Miss Taylor and St. Mary Mead, who once used a teacup to mix a remedy for her roses, leaving a stain not unlike these. Could it be a chemical, a poison, or something more personal? Inspector Craddock, ever diligent, had spent the day combing through the physical evidence and re-interviewing the staff. He now returned to the drawing room, his expression grim but determined. We've made progress, he announced, his voice cutting through the silence. The library window, though found open, shows no signs of forced entry. The latch was undone from the inside, suggesting the killer was already in the house. A murmur rippled through the group. Captain Roger Blake, leaning against the mantelpiece, shifted uncomfortably, his earlier story of a shadowy figure now thoroughly discredited. Lady Margaret Ashford, seated with regal composure, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Cecilia, her daughter, clutched her handkerchief, her eyes darting to her mother. Mr. Lionel Drake, the solicitor, scribbled furiously in his notebook, his face pale. Mrs. Evelyn Carver sipped her tea with an air of detachment, though her fingers tightened around the cup. Dr. Thomas Hayworth and his wife Clara exchanged a glance, their expressions guarded. Miss Marple's eyes missed none of these reactions. She noted the way Blake avoided Craddock's gaze, the faint tremor in Drake's hand, and the way Cecilia seemed to shrink under her mother's scrutiny. but her attention was drawn to Mrs. Carver's teacup, which she set down on a side table. As the widow moved away, Miss Marple leaned forward, peering at the cup. There it was again, a faint reddish-brown stain on the rim, identical to the others. Her heart quickened. 3 cups, all with the same mark. This was no accident. "Dolly," she whispered, "look at Mrs. Carver's teacup. Do you see the stain?" Dolly squinted, then gasped softly. "Jane, it's just like the others. What does it mean?" "I'm not yet certain."
And we've uncovered something curious. The maid Ellen reported finding a teacup in the scullery this morning, hidden behind a stack of plates. It had a strange stain, reddish, not like tea or coffee. We've sent it to the laboratory for analysis. But I'd like to know if anyone here recognizes it. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. Miss Marple's needles paused. "Inspector," she said gently, "might I see this cup? I have a small interest in such details." Craddock nodded, signalling Constable Pauck to retrieve the cup from the evidence box. When it was brought out, wrapped in the cloth, Miss Marple examined it closely. The stain was unmistakable, reddish-brown, faintly metallic, just like the others. She sniffed it, detecting the same odd odour she had noted in the library. "Most curious," she murmured. "Inspector, have you considered that this stain might be related to the crime? Perhaps a substance used to incapacitate Sir Henry before the dagger was used?" Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Poison, you mean?" "The coroner found no obvious signs, but we're awaiting a full toxicology report." "Do you have a theory, Miss Marple?" She smiled faintly. "Only an old woman's fancies, Inspector, but I wonder if the cups were used to carry something unusual. A sedative, perhaps, or something more sinister." The room grew quieter, the guests' faces tense. Mrs. Carver's smile faltered, and Drake's pen stopped mid-sentence. Cecilia's hands twisted her handkerchief into knots. Miss Marple filed these reactions away, her mind working swiftly. She thought of Mrs. Green in St. Mary Mead, who once used a teacup to mix a sleeping draught for her insomniac husband. Could the stain be a trace of such a substance, used to render Sir Henry helpless before the fatal blow? Craddock moved on, questioning the guests about their movements after dinner. Captain Blake reiterated his alibi, claiming he had gone straight to bed. "I've nothing to hide," he said, though his eyes flicked to Lady Margaret. She, in turn, confirmed her own alibi, stating she had retired at 10:30 and heard nothing. "Henry often worked late," she said coolly. It was his habit to lock the library door. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. "Lady Margaret," she said softly, "did Sir Henry take tea or any other drink in the library that night? I noticed a glass of brandy, but it was untouched." Lady Margaret's lips tightened. "He sometimes took tea, but I didn't see him with a cup that night. Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason," Miss Marple said airily. "Just an old woman's curiosity about habits." The questioning continued, but Miss Marple's attention was drawn to Cecilia, who had grown increasingly withdrawn. The young woman's eyes were red. "Dinner. I was unwell." Miss Marple leaned toward her voice gentle. "My dear, that teacup by your chair last night, did you drink from it? The stain was most unusual." Cecilia blinked, her face crumpling. I don't know. I think I had tea, but I was so tired. I don't remember the stain." Miss Marple nodded, her expression kind, but her mind alert. Cecilia's vagueness was troubling, but it could be fear rather than guilt. She thought of young Annie in St. Mary Mead,
who stammered when questioned about a stolen brooch, not because she was guilty, but because she feared being blamed. Was Cecilia hiding something, or simply overwhelmed? As the evening drew to a close, Craddock announced that the guests would remain under observation, with no one allowed to leave the manor. "We're close to answers," he said, his tone firm, "but I need your cooperation." Miss Marple, returning to her room with Dolly, felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting. The teacup stains, the open window, the unsigned codicil to Sir Henry's will, all pointed to a carefully planned crime. She thought of the whispered conversation she had overheard between Dr. Hayworth and Clara, and the tension between Lady Margaret and Captain Blake. Each was a thread, but the teacup stains were the strongest. "Dolly," she said as they reached their rooms, "we are dealing with a clever mind. The killer used the teacups for a purpose, and I suspect it was to deliver something to Sir Henry, something that made the dagger possible." Dolly shivered. "Poison, Jane? But why stab him if he was poisoned?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "That, my dear, is the question, and the answer lies in the stain." Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The second day at Greystone Manor dawned with a heavy mist cloaking the estate, as if the house itself were shrouded in secrecy. The guests, still confined under Inspector Craddock's watchful eye, gathered for breakfast in the dining room. But the clatter of cutlery was subdued, the conversation stilted. Dolly Bantry, seated across from Miss Marple, pushed her toast around her plate, her appetite dulled by the oppressive atmosphere. "Jane, I can't bear it," she whispered. "Everyone's hiding something, and I feel like we're sitting with a murderer every time we eat." Miss Marple, sipping her tea, appeared unruffled, a knitting resting in her lap. "Secrets are like weeds, Dolly," she murmured. "They grow in the dark, but a little light will expose them." Her thoughts were on the teacup stains.
Mark, a tonic that, in larger doses, could be lethal. Inspector Craddock, having spent the morning reviewing the coroner's preliminary report, joined the guests at breakfast, his expression grim. "The toxicology results are delayed," he announced. "But we've confirmed Sir Henry was alive until at least 11 p.m., based on the state of his digestion. The dagger was the cause of death, but we're exploring whether he was incapacitated first." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Lady Margaret Ashford, dressed in mourning black, set her cup down with a clink. "Incapacitated? You mean poisoned?" Her voice was sharp, her eyes darting to Cecilia, who sat pale and silent. Craddock's gaze was steady. "It's a possibility. The teacup found in the library is of particular interest. Miss Marple, you've mentioned its stain several times. Care to elaborate?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "I am merely an old woman, Inspector, but I find the stain curious. It appears on 3 cups now, in the drawing room, the library, and the scullery. It is not tea nor coffee, but something with a metallic scent. I wonder if it might be a substance used to weaken Sir Henry before the fatal blow." The guests exchanged glances, some wary, others defensive. Captain Roger Blake, his jaw tight, spoke up. "This is nonsense. A teacup? You're suggesting someone poisoned Sir Henry with a cup of tea?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "Not necessarily tea, Captain Blake, but cups are often used for more than drinking, are they not? In my village, I've seen them used for all manner of things, remedies, chemicals, even poisons." Blake's face reddened, but he said nothing. Mr. Lionel Drake,
The solicitor cleared his throat, his fingers fidgeting with his pocket watch. "This is all speculation," he said. "Sir Henry was stabbed. Why complicate matters with talk of poison?" Miss Marple noted the edge in his voice, the way his eyes avoided hers. She thought of Mr. Simmons, the St. Mary Mead chemist, who grew nervous when questioned about his stock of arsenic. Nervousness, she knew, often betrayed knowledge. As breakfast ended, Craddock announced that he would conduct another round of interviews, focusing on the guests' relationships with Sir Henry. Miss Marple, with Dolly in tow, accompanied him to the morning room, her presence a quiet reassurance to the inspector. The first to be questioned was Lady Margaret, whose composure seemed more brittle today. "Henry and I had our differences," she admitted, her hands folded tightly. "He was a difficult man, stubborn, ambitious, but I had no reason to harm him. His death leaves me with nothing but debts." Craddock raised an eyebrow. "Debts?"
This weekend. Miss Marple's needles paused. "Lady Margaret," she said gently, "this announcement, was it the surprise Sir Henry mentioned? And did Cecilia know of it?" Lady Margaret's eyes flickered. "Cecilia? She knew Henry was planning something, but not the details. She's a fragile girl, easily upset." Miss Marple nodded, filing away the hint of evasion. Cecilia was next, her nervousness palpable. She sat twisting her handkerchief, her eyes red-rimmed. "I didn't know about Father's plans," she said, her voice trembling. "He was always talking about surprises. I thought it was another of his schemes." "And your relationship with him?" Craddock asked. "Any disagreements?" Cecilia hesitated, her hands shaking. We argued sometimes. He wanted me to marry someone I didn't love, but I wouldn't hurt him." Miss Marple's voice was soft. "My dear, that teacup by your chair. Do you recall what you drank from it? The stain was most unusual." Cecilia's eyes widened. I think it was tea. I don't know. I was so upset that night." The interviews revealed more cracks in the guests' facades. Captain Blake admitted to a business deal with Sir Henry that had soured, leaving him in debt. "But I didn't kill him," he insisted. "I needed him alive to settle it." Mr. Drake revealed that Sir Henry had been planning to revise his will, though he refused to disclose details, citing client confidentiality. Mrs. Carver claimed ignorance of Sir Henry's affairs, but her evasive answers about her late-night movements raised Craddock's suspicions. Dr. Hayworth and Clara were the most guarded, their alibis tightly aligned. "We were together all evening," Dr. Hayworth said firmly. "I have no knowledge of teacups or stains." But Clara's eyes darted to her husband, a flicker of fear in them. As the interviews concluded, Miss Marple requested another look at the scullery teacup, now in evidence. Craddock obliged, and she examined it closely, noting the same reddish-brown stain. "Inspector," she said, "I believe this substance was ingested by Sir Henry, perhaps to render him helpless. The dagger was the final act, but the teacup was the prelude." Craddock frowned. "But why 3 cups? And why in different places?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "That, Inspector, is the heart of the matter. The killer used the cups to conceal their method, but they could not conceal the stain." Later, as the guests gathered for tea, Miss Marple overheard a heated exchange between Mr. Drake and Mrs. Carver in the hallway. "You knew about the will," Drake hissed. "Don't pretend you didn't." Mrs. Carver's voice was icy. "Mind your own business, Lionel."
Codicil, the debts, the proposed marriage for Cecilia. Each was a thread, but the teacup stains tied them together. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead where a similar stain was traced to a sleeping draught used to mask a theft. Could this be a similar ruse? "Dolly," she whispered as they returned to their rooms, "the killer is growing careless. The stains are their mistake, and we shall use them to unravel the truth." Dolly shivered. "Jane, you make it sound so simple, but I'm terrified. What if the killer strikes again?" Miss Marple's smile was serene. "They will not, Dolly. The light is falling on their secrets, and they cannot hide much longer." Word count 1980. To continue, please say "continue" with Chapter 8. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The third morning at Greystone Manor dawned with a chill that seemed to seep into the very walls, mirroring the growing unease among the guests. The dining room, where breakfast was served, was a tableau of strained faces and forced civility. Dolly Bantry, seated beside Miss Marple, picked at her kedgeree, her nerves frayed by the mounting tension. "Jane, I can't stand this waiting," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the clink of porcelain. "Everyone's on edge, and I swear I saw Cecilia crying in the garden earlier. Something's going to break, isn't it?" Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly, her eyes scanning the room with their usual quiet intensity. "Indeed, Dolly," she murmured. "When secrets are held too tightly, they burst forth like water from a cracked dam. We must be ready to catch the truth when it spills." Her thoughts lingered on the teacup stains, 3 cups, each marked with that peculiar reddish-brown residue found in the drawing room, the library, and the scullery. The laboratory results were still pending, but Miss Marple was certain the stains were no coincidence. They were the killer's misstep, a clue to the method or motive behind Sir Henry Ashford's murder. She recalled Mrs. Carter in St. Mary Mead, who once used a teacup to mix a sedative for her ailing dog, leaving a similar mark. Could the stain be a drug administered to render Sir Henry defenseless before the dagger struck? Inspector Craddock, looking weary but resolute, joined the guests at breakfast, his notebook tucked under his arm. "We've had a development," he announced, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "The coroner's preliminary report suggests Sir Henry may have ingested a sedative before his death." Blake's jaw tightened, and Mr. Lionel Drake's fingers froze on his pocket watch. Mrs. Evelyn Carver's smile was brittle, her eyes darting to the others. Dr. Thomas Hayworth and his wife, Clara, exchanged a glance, their expressions guarded. Miss Marple's needles paused. A sedative, she thought. It fits the stain's metallic scent. But why 3 cups? And why scattered across the house? She noted Cecilia's distress, more pronounced than before, and the way Lady Margaret avoided her daughter's gaze. Something was amiss in their relationship, and Miss Marple suspected it was tied to Sir Henry's mysterious surprise announcement. Craddock continued, "I'll need to speak with each of you again, particularly about any knowledge of sedatives or medicines in the house. Dr. Hayworth, as the physician, perhaps you can start." Dr. Hayworth's face remained calm, but Clara's hands trembled as she clutched her napkin. "I keep a small medical bag in my room," he said evenly. "It contains standard remedies, sedatives, painkillers, the like, but I assure you none were used on Sir Henry. My bag has not been touched." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "Dr. Hayworth," she said gently, "forgive an old woman's curiosity, but do any of your sedatives leave a residue when mixed in liquid? A reddish-brown mark, perhaps?" Dr. Hayworth blinked, caught off guard. Some do, yes. Chloral hydrate, for instance, can leave a slight discoloration if not fully dissolved, but I've not prescribed it here. Miss Marple nodded, filing the information away. Chloral hydrate, a powerful sedative tasteless in small doses, but potentially deadly in larger ones. She thought of the teacup stains, the metallic odor, and the possibility that Sir Henry had been drugged to prevent resistance. But why 3 cups? Were they a clumsy attempt to conceal the crime, or a deliberate misdirection? As breakfast ended, Cecilia rose abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I can't do this anymore," she cried, her voice breaking. She fled the room, tears streaming down her face. Lady Margaret started to follow, but Craddock raised a hand. "Let her go, Lady Margaret. I'll speak with her privately." Miss Marple, sensing a pivotal moment, whispered to Dolly, "Come. We must be there when Cecilia speaks. Her heart is heavy, and it may reveal more than she intends." In the morning room, Cecilia sat sobbing, her handkerchief sodden. Craddock, with Miss Marple and Dolly present, spoke gently. "Miss Ashford, you're clearly distressed. If you know something about your father's death, now is the time to tell us." Cecilia's shoulders shook. I didn't want to say anything. I was afraid. But father, he was going to ruin everything." Her words tumbled out, halting and raw. "He wanted me to marry—"
Else! Miss Marple's needles stopped. "And who is that, my dear?" she asked softly. Cecilia's eyes widened, then dropped to her lap. I can't say. But father found out, and he was furious. We argued that night before dinner. He said he'd cut me out of his will if I didn't obey." Craddock leaned forward. "Did you see your father after dinner? In the library, perhaps?" Cecilia shook her head frantically. "No, I went to bed at 10. I swear it." Miss Marple's voice was kind but probing. "Cecilia, that teacup by your chair, did you drink from it that night, or did someone else use it?" Cecilia's face crumpled. "I don't know. I had tea, I think. But I was so upset. I left it on the table. I didn't notice any stain." Miss Marple exchanged a glance with Craddock. Cecilia's outburst was a crack in the facade, revealing a motive, her opposition to her father's plans. But was it enough to drive her to murder? Miss Marple thought of young Lily in St. Mary Mead, who had defied her father's wishes and run off with a suitor, only to return heartbroken. Love, she knew, could push people to desperate acts, but Cecilia's tears seemed genuine. As Cecilia was escorted back to the drawing room, Miss Marple lingered, her mind racing. The revelation about the proposed marriage to Mr. Drake was significant, as was the hint of a secret lover. She recalled the whispered argument between Lady Margaret and Captain Blake and the tension between Drake and Mrs. Carver. Were they all entangled in Sir Henry's plans? Later that afternoon, Miss Marple requested to see the library again, accompanied by Dolly and Constable Pork. The room was as it had been, the papers still scattered, the teacup untouched. She examined the desk, noting the unsigned codicil to Sir Henry's will. It mentioned a charitable trust, but also a clause reducing Cecilia's inheritance if she refused a suitable match. Miss Marple's lips pursed. "Dolly," she said, "this codicil is the key to the motive, I believe. Sir Henry was exerting control, and someone resented it deeply." Dolly shivered. "Jane, do you think Cecilia did it? She was so upset." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Upset, yes, but guilty? I am not so sure. The teacup stains suggest a careful plan, and Cecilia is not a careful girl. We must look to those who are." As they returned to the drawing room, Miss Marple overheard another hushed exchange, this time between Dr. Haworth and Mrs. Carver. "You should have destroyed it," Haworth muttered. "If they find it, we're finished." Mrs. Carver's voice was sharp. "Don't lecture me, Thomas. You're as guilty as I am." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, masking her interest. The web of secrets was unraveling, and the teacup stains were at its center. She thought of the metallic scent, the possibility of chloral hydrate, and the 3 cups scattered across the house.
To deliver the sedative, She was certain. But the staging was deliberate, designed to confuse. "Dolly," she whispered, "we are close to the truth. The stains are the killer's signature, and they will betray them." Dolly's eyes widened. "Jane, you're frightening me. Who do you suspect?" Miss Marple's smile was serene. "All of them, my dear, until the pieces fall into place. But the teacup will lead us to the answer."
Chapter 9. The Trap. The late afternoon sun cast long, wavering shadows across the drawing room of Greystone Manor, where the air was thick with anticipation and dread. The guests, confined for days under the shadow of Sir Henry Ashford's murder, sat in a tense circle, their faces betraying a mix of fear, suspicion, and exhaustion. Dolly Bantry, seated beside Miss Marple, clutched her shawl tightly, her eyes darting from one guest to another.
"Jane, it's like a storm about to break," she whispered. "I can feel it. Something's going to happen tonight."
Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly, her expression serene, but her eyes sharp as they surveyed the room. "A storm, yes, Dolly," she murmured, "and we shall guide its lightning to strike the truth." Her mind was fixed on the teacup stains, 3 cups, each marked with that peculiar reddish-brown residue found in the drawing room, the library, and the scullery. The laboratory had confirmed traces of chloral hydrate in the library cup, a sedative strong enough to render Sir Henry helpless before the dagger struck. The stains were the killer's mistake, and Miss Marple intended to use them to unravel the web of lies. Inspector Craddock, sensing the mounting tension, had agreed to Miss Marple's suggestion to gather the guests for a discussion. "Not an interrogation," she had said, her voice mild, "but a conversation. People reveal themselves when they feel the pressure of others' eyes." Craddock, familiar with her methods, had arranged for the group to assemble in the drawing room after tea, with Constable Polk stationed at the door to ensure no one left. As the clock struck 5, Craddock stood, his presence commanding silence. "We've made progress in the investigation," he began, his voice steady. "Sir Henry was sedated with chloral hydrate before he was stabbed, likely through a drink served in a teacup. The stains Miss Marple noted are key evidence. I want each of you to think carefully. Did you see anyone handling a teacup that night? Or notice anything unusual?" The guests shifted uncomfortably. Lady Margaret Ashford, her face pale but composed, spoke first. "This is absurd, Inspector. Henry was stabbed, not poisoned. Why focus on teacups?" Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. "Lady Margaret, the teacups are significant because they carried the sedative that made the stabbing possible. The killer needed Sir Henry defenseless. I wonder, did you see anyone with a cup near the library that night?" Lady Margaret's eyes narrowed. "I saw nothing. I was in my room by 10:30.
Table I didn't see farther after dinner." Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her mind was alert. Cecilia's distress was genuine, but her vagueness about the teacup was troubling. She thought of young Sarah in St. Mary Mead, who had hidden a secret love affair until pressed, much like Cecilia now. Was Cecilia protecting someone, her secret lover perhaps? Captain Roger Blake, his jaw tight, spoke up.
"This is a waste of time. If there was a sedative, anyone could have slipped it into a drink. Why not look at the staff? The butler Grayson was in and out of the library all evening."
Grayson, standing at the edge of the room, stiffened. "I resent that, sir. I locked the library door at 10:30, as was Sir Henry's custom. I saw no teacups." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Captain Blake, your suggestion of an outsider was intriguing, but the open window showed no signs of entry. The killer was in this house. I wonder, did you see anyone near the library after dinner? Perhaps carrying a cup? Blake's face reddened. I told you I was in my room by 11. I saw nothing. Mr. Lionel Drake, his fingers fidgeting with his pocket watch, cleared his throat. This focus on teacups is ridiculous. Sir Henry was a wealthy man with enemies. Why not investigate his business rivals? Miss Marple tilted her head. Mr. Drake, you mentioned Sir Henry was revising his will. Could that have prompted someone in this room to act? A change in inheritance, perhaps? Drake's hand froze. I can't discuss that. It's confidential. Mrs. Evelyn Carver laughed, a brittle sound. Oh, come now, Lionel. We all know Henry was planning to cut someone out. Why not admit it? Her eyes flicked to Cecilia, who flinched. Miss Marple noted the exchange, her mind racing. Mrs. Carver's barb was deliberate, designed to shift suspicion. She thought of Mrs. Price in St. Mary Mead, who used sharp words to deflect attention from her own secrets. Was Mrs. Carver hiding something, or merely stirring the pot? Dr. Thomas Hayworth, his voice calm but strained, spoke next. As a physician, I can confirm chloral hydrate is tasteless in small doses, but it leaves a residue if not fully dissolved. My medical bag contains no such substance, Inspector. You've checked it. Clara Hayworth, clinging to her husband's arm, nodded vigorously. We were together all evening. We know nothing about teacups or sedatives. Miss Marple's needles paused. Dr. Hayworth, you mentioned chloral hydrate's properties. Is it common for a physician to carry such a drug, or might it be found elsewhere in a household like this? Hayworth hesitated. It's not uncommon in medical practice, but I don't carry it. As for the household, I wouldn't know. Miss Marple nodded, her expression bland, but her
Involved or merely entangled in a separate secret. As the conversation continued, Miss Marple subtly increased the pressure. It is curious, she said, her voice carrying a deceptive mildness, that 3 teacups bear the same stain, one by Cecilia's chair, one in the library, and one hidden in the scullery. The killer used these cups to deliver the sedative, but why 3? Was it carelessness, or a deliberate attempt to confuse us? The room grew silent, the guests' faces tense. Cecilia's sobs broke the stillness, her voice raw. I can't bear it. I didn't want Father to die, but he was going to ruin everything. I saw someone that night, near the library. I didn't tell because I was afraid. Craddock leaned forward. Who, Miss Ashford? Who did you see? Cecilia's eyes darted to Captain Blake, then away. It was dark. I couldn't be sure. A man, I think, carrying something, maybe a cup. Blake's face darkened. That's a lie. I was in my room. Lady Margaret's voice was sharp. Cecilia, stop this nonsense. You're upset imagining things. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Cecilia's revelation, though vague, was a crack in the facade. She thought of the teacup stains, the open window, the unsigned codicil. The killer had planned carefully, but the multiple cups suggested a mistake, or a deliberate misdirection. She decided to press further. My dear friends, she said, addressing the group, let us consider the teacups. Someone in this room used them to deliver chloral hydrate to Sir Henry, ensuring he could not resist the dagger. But the cups were not cleaned, and one was hidden. Why? Did the killer panic, or did they want us to find them? Mrs. Carver's smile was tight. You're suggesting a conspiracy, Miss Marple. How theatrical. Not at all. Miss Marple replied. Merely a pattern. In my village, I once knew a woman who hid a stained cup after mixing a remedy. She was ashamed, you see, of her actions. I wonder if someone here feels the same. The guests shifted, their eyes avoiding hers. Drake's watch ticked loudly in the silence. Blake's hands clenched, and Clara Hayworth's face paled. Miss Marple felt the tension building, the truth hovering just out of reach. "Dolly," she whispered as the group dispersed, "the trap is set. The killer is nervous now, and they will make a mistake." Dolly shivered. "Jane, you're terrifying when you're like this. Who do you think it is?" Miss Marple's smile was serene. "The teacup will tell us, Dolly. It always does." Chapter 10. The Reveal. The voice, a hushed whisper. "Jane, I can't stand this suspense. You know who did it, don't you? I can see it in your eyes." Miss Marple's knitting needles rested in her lap, her expression serene, but her gaze sharp as it swept over the assembled group. Lady Margaret Ashford, Cecilia, Captain Roger Blake, Mr. Lionel Drake, Mrs. Evelyn Carver, Dr. Thomas Hayworth, and Clara Hayworth. "Patience, Dolly," she murmured. "The truth is like a delicate stitch. It must be placed just so, or the whole pattern unravels." Her mind was a tapestry of clues, woven together by the teacup stains, the open window, the unsigned codicil, and Cecilia's tearful outburst. The laboratory had confirmed chloral hydrate in the library teacup, and Miss Marple was now certain of the killer's identity. Tonight, she would lay the trap's final snare. Inspector Craddock stood, his presence commanding silence. "We are close to solving Sir Henry Ashford's murder," he announced. "Thanks to Miss Marple's observations, we've pieced together a sequence of events. I ask you to listen carefully as she explains." All eyes turned to Miss Marple, who rose slowly, her lavender cardigan lending her an air of unassuming authority. "My dear friends," she began, her voice gentle but clear, "a murder is never simple. It is a puzzle of human hearts, and the clues are in the details. Let us begin with the teacup stains, those curious reddish-brown marks found on 3 cups, one in the drawing room, one in the library, and one hidden in the scullery." The guests shifted, their faces betraying unease. Lady Margaret's lips tightened. Cecilia's hands trembled, and Drake's fingers clutched his pocket watch. Miss Marple continued. "These stains were traces of chloral hydrate, a sedative used to render Sir Henry defenseless before he was stabbed. The question is, why 3 cups and why scattered across the house? The answer lies in the killer's attempt to confuse us." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. "Let us reconstruct the night of the murder. Sir Henry retired to the library at 10, locking the door as was his habit. The butler, Grayson, confirmed this. Yet the window was found open, and the dagger, a decorative piece from the mantel, was used to kill him. The teacup in the library, stained with chloral hydrate, suggests he was given a drink laced with the sedative. But how did it get there, and who administered it?" Captain Blake interrupted, his voice sharp. "This is speculation. Anyone could have slipped something into a drink." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "Indeed, Captain Blake. But not anyone could have known Sir Henry's habits so well, or had access to chloral hydrate. Let us consider the motives. Sir Henry was planning a significant announcement, a change to his will, reducing Cecilia's inheritance if she refused an arranged marriage to Mr. Drake. This codicil, found unsigned on his desk, created
Tension. Cecilia, you admitted to arguing with your father about his plans. You loved another, did you not? Cecilia's face crumpled, tears spilling. "Yes, but I didn't kill him. I loved father even if we fought." Miss Marple nodded kindly. "I believe you, my dear. Your distress is genuine. Much like young Annie in my village, who argued with her father but meant no harm. But someone used your argument to their advantage." She turned to Lady Margaret. "Lady Margaret, you knew of Sir Henry's debts and his plan to sell part of the estate.
You also knew of his intention to force Cecilia's marriage. Did this trouble you? Lady Margaret's voice was icy. Henry's decisions were his own. I had no part in his death. Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Mr. Drake. Mr. Drake, as Sir Henry's solicitor, you were privy to his plans. You stood to gain from Cecilia's marriage as it would secure your financial ties to the estate. Your nervousness, checking your watch, your evasive answers, suggests you knew more than you've admitted. Drake's face paled. I was only following Sir Henry's instructions. I didn't harm him. Miss Marple continued, her voice steady. Then we have Captain Blake, who had a failed business deal with Sir Henry, leaving him in debt. And Mrs. Carver, whose sharp words and evasive answers hint at a deeper connection to the estate's finances. Dr. Haworth and Clara, you've been guarded, whispering about something you feared would be discovered. Dr. Haworth stiffened, but Clara's eyes filled with tears. We've done nothing wrong, she cried. Miss Marple raised a hand. Let us return to the teacups. The stain in the drawing room was on a cup near Cecilia's chair, suggesting someone used it to prepare the sedative. The library cup was used to deliver it to Sir Henry. The scullery cup, hidden behind plates, was an attempt to dispose of evidence. But why 3? The killer needed multiple cups to create confusion, to make it seem as though the sedative was a common occurrence, not a targeted act. She paused, her eyes locking on Mrs. Evelyn Carver. Mrs. Carver, you are a clever woman, accustomed to manipulating situations to your advantage. You were seen arguing with Mr. Drake about the will and with Dr. Haworth about something you wished to destroy. You had access to chloral hydrate, did you not? Perhaps through a connection to a chemist or even Dr. Haworth's medical bag. Mrs. Carver's smile was brittle. This is outrageous. I know nothing of sedatives or teacups. Miss Marple's voice grew firmer. I believe you do. You were Sir Henry's mistress, were you not? A fact he intended to reveal in his announcement, threatening your reputation and financial security. You had motive, means, and opportunity.
Drink laced with chlorohydrate. When he was unconscious, you stabbed him with a dagger, leaving the window open to suggest an intruder. The room was silent, all eyes on Mrs. Carver. Her face paled, her hands trembling. You have no proof, she whispered. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. The teacup stains are proof. The scullery cup was hidden but not well enough. You used it to mix the sedative, but in your haste you left the stain. The metallic scent, the reddish-brown mark, it was chloral hydrate, confirmed by the laboratory. And your argument with Dr. Haworth, he supplied the drug, didn't he? Under duress, perhaps, to protect his own secrets. Dr. Haworth's face crumpled. I gave her a small amount, he admitted, his voice breaking. She threatened to expose Clara's past, a scandal from years ago. I had no choice. Clara sobbed, clutching her husband. Mrs. Carver's composure shattered. You can't prove I killed him, she cried. Anyone could have used that cup. Miss Marple's voice was calm but relentless. But only you were seen near the library that night, Mrs. Carver. Cecilia saw a figure, and though she was too frightened to name you, her glance at Captain Blake was a misdirection. You used your charm to manipulate others, but the teacup stains betrayed you. You killed Sir Henry to protect your future, and you tried to frame Cecilia by placing a stained cup near her chair. Mrs. Carver stood, her eyes wild. No! I won't listen to this! She moved toward the door, but Constable Pock blocked her path. Craddock stepped forward, his voice firm. Mrs. Carver, you're under arrest for the murder of Sir Henry Ashford. We'll need a full statement. The room erupted in murmurs, Cecilia sobbing in relief, Lady Margaret's face a mask of shock. Miss Marple sat quietly, her needles resuming their rhythm. Dolly leaned close, her voice awed. Jane, you did it.
You saw it all in those teacups. Miss Marple smiled faintly. The smallest details, Dolly, reveal the largest truths. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The morning after Mrs. Evelyn Carver's dramatic arrest, Greystone Manor seemed to exhale, its oppressive atmosphere lightening as the truth of Sir Henry Ashford's murder came to light. The drawing room, where the guests had spent so many tense hours, was now bathed in soft sunlight, the heavy curtains drawn back to reveal the rolling lawns beyond. Dolly Bantry, seated beside Miss Marple, sipped her tea with a mixture of relief and awe. "Jane, I still can't believe it," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Mrs. Carver, of all people, and all because of those teacup stains. You're a marvel." Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly, her expression serene as she folded her work into her bag. "Not a marvel, Dolly," she murmured, "merely an observer of human nature. People are so very revealing."
Case, the 3 teacup stains, the chloral hydrate, the open window, and the unsigned codicil. Each had been a thread in the tapestry of deceit, and she had unraveled it with the quiet precision of her village wisdom. The guests, no longer confined, were preparing to depart, their faces a mix of relief and lingering shock. Lady Margaret Ashford, dressed in sombre black, sat with Cecilia, a hand resting on her daughter's arm, a rare gesture of warmth. Cecilia, though pale, seemed lighter, her tears replaced by a tentative calm. Captain Roger Blake packed his bags with a forced cheer, his charm returning now that suspicion had lifted. Mr. Lionel Drake, his pocket watch tucked away, scribbled notes, like he preparing to manage the estate's legal affairs. Dr. Thomas Hayworth and Clara, their secrets exposed, sat quietly, their heads bowed in murmured conversation. Mrs. Carver, under police custody, was absent, her fate sealed by her own actions. Inspector Craddock, ever professional, approached Miss Marple, his notebook tucked under his arm. "Miss Marple," he said, a note of admiration in his voice, "you've done it again. The teacup stains were the key, just as you said. The laboratory confirmed chloral hydrate in all 3 cups, and Mrs. Carver's fingerprints were on the scullery cup. She's confessed to the murder, though she claims it was a moment of desperation." Miss Marple inclined her head modestly. "I'm glad to have been of help, Inspector. But the truth was there all along, in the small things. The teacups, the glances, the lies, they spoke louder than words." Dolly leaned forward, her curiosity unabated. "Jane, tell us how you knew it was Mrs. Carver. I was sure it was Captain Blake or even Mr. Drake with all his fidgeting." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "It's always tempting to suspect the obvious, Dolly. Captain Blake's debts and Mr. Drake's secrecy were compelling, but they were distractions. Mrs. Carver was clever. She used her charm to deflect suspicion, placing a stained cup near Cecilia to suggest her involvement. But she underestimated the teacups themselves. They were her mistake, left behind in her haste to cover her tracks." Craddock nodded. "She admitted to using the scullery cup to mix the chloral hydrate, obtained from Dr. Hayworth under threat of exposing his wife's past. She laced Sir Henry's drink in the library, then stabbed him when he was unconscious. The open window was a ruse to suggest an intruder." Miss Marple sighed softly. "And the motive, Inspector?" "It wasn't merely financial, I suspect." Craddock's expression grew sombre. She confessed that Sir Henry was her lover, and his announcement was to reveal their affair, threatening her social standing and her hopes of securing a wealthy marriage elsewhere. She acted to protect her future, but the teacups betrayed her. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to St. Mary Mead, where Mrs. Langley had once hidden a secret affair, only to be undone by a misplaced letter. "Human nature," she said softly, "is so predictable. Greed, fear, love. They drive us to desperate acts, but they leave traces. The teacup stains were Mrs. Carver's traces, as clear as footprints in the snow." Dolly shivered, her tea forgotten. "Jane, you make it sound so simple, but it's chilling. How do you see these things when the rest of us are blind?" Miss Marple's smile was gentle.
I have lived a long time, Dolly, and in a small village, one learns to notice the little things. The way a glance lingers, a word is chosen, a cup is left behind. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a woman who used a teacup to mix a tonic, much like Mrs. Carver. The stain was the same, and it told me to look closer. Craddock cleared his throat. Your village must be a hotbed of intrigue, Miss Marple. I'd wager you've solved more crimes there than I have in Scotland Yard. Miss Marple chuckled softly. Oh, Inspector, St. Mary Mead is no different from Greystone Manor. People are the same everywhere, full of hopes and fears, and occasionally, secrets they cannot keep. As the guests began to disperse, Cecilia approached, her eyes still red but grateful. Miss Marple, she said, her voice trembling. Thank you. I was so afraid they'd think it was me. I didn't know how to tell them about my feelings for Roger. Miss Marple's gaze softened. Captain Blake, I presume. My dear, love is a powerful thing, but it must be honest. Your father's plans for you were misguided, but his heart was in the estate's future. You must build your own now. Cecilia nodded, tears brimming. I will, and I'll never forget what you've done. Lady Margaret, standing nearby, added her thanks, her voice softer than before. Miss Marple, you've saved my daughter from suspicion. I misjudged you. Miss Marple inclined her head. We all misjudge at times, Lady Margaret. It is human, but truth has a way of finding the light. As the guests departed, Miss Marple and Dolly prepared to leave, their bags packed and waiting in the hall. Craddock escorted them to the door, his respect evident. Miss Marple, I hope you'll consider assisting us again. Your insight is remarkable. Miss Marple smiled. I am an old woman, Inspector, with little to offer but observation. But if I can be of service, you know where to find me. Dolly, bustling beside her, couldn't resist a final question. Jane, what will you do now? Back to knitting and tea in St. Mary Mead? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Oh, Dolly, there is always something to observe.
Secrets, thanks to a single teacup stain. But she knew the world was full of such puzzles, waiting for a keen eye to solve them. She settled back, her knitting bag at her side, content in the knowledge that human nature, for all its complexities, could never hide from the truth. Chapter 12. The Lingering Doubt. The journey back to St. Mary Mead was quiet, the rolling countryside passing in a blur of green and gold under the late morning sun. Dolly Bantry, seated beside Miss Marple in the chauffeured car, fidgeted with her gloves, her mind still reeling from the events at Greystone Manor. Jane, I thought it was over, she said, her voice tinged with unease. Mrs. Carver confessed, the teacup stains were explained, and yet I feel there's something we've missed. You're awfully quiet. Don't tell me you're thinking the same. Miss Marple's knitting needles resting in her lap were still for once, her gaze fixed on the horizon. You are perceptive, Dolly, she murmured. The case is solved, yes, but there is a loose thread in the tapestry. The teacup stains led us to Mrs. Carver, but I cannot help wondering about the third cup in the scullery. Why was it hidden so poorly? And why did Dr. Hayworth yield so quickly to her blackmail? She thought of Mrs. Harrow in St. Mary Mead, who once hid a stained cup to cover a minor theft, only to reveal a larger deception later. Could there be more to this crime than Mrs. Carver's confession? As the car neared St. Mary Mead, the messenger from Greystone Manor intercepted them, delivering an urgent note from Inspector Craddock. Dolly read it aloud, her hands trembling. Jane, listen to this. Miss Marple, new evidence has emerged. A letter found in Mrs. Carver's room suggests an accomplice in Sir Henry's murder. I request your return to Greystone at once.
An accomplice! Jane, this changes everything. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Indeed, Dolly, the puzzle is not complete. We must return and see what this letter reveals. She directed the driver to turn back, her mind already sifting through the details of the case. The teacup stains, the open window, the unsigned codicil, and now this hint of a second conspirator. Upon their arrival at Greystone Manor, the atmosphere was markedly different. The guests, who had begun to disperse, were summoned back, their faces a mix of frustration and fear. Inspector Craddock met Miss Marple and Dolly in the library, where the air still held the faint metallic scent of the crime scene. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice grave, "this letter was found hidden in Mrs. Carver's jewelry box. It's in her handwriting, addressed to an unnamed recipient, and it implies she acted under someone else's influence." He handed her the letter, which read, "I've done as you asked, though my heart misgives me."
You'll keep your promise. The letter was unsigned, but the elegant script matched Mrs. Carver's. Miss Marple's lips pursed as she read. "Most curious," she said. "Mrs. Carver was not the mastermind then. Someone else orchestrated the plan, using her as the instrument. But who?" Dolly shivered. "Jane, it could be anyone. Captain Blake, Mr. Drake, even Lady Margaret. They all had motives." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. She thought of the scullery cup, hidden clumsily as if meant to be found. Was it a deliberate clue, planted by an accomplice to shift blame? She recalled the whispered conversations, Dr. Hayworth and Clara's fear, Lady Margaret and Captain Blake's tension, Mr. Drake's nervous tics. Each could fit, but the letter's tone suggested intimacy, a shared secret. Craddock gathered the remaining guests in the drawing room, where the tension was palpable. Lady Margaret sat rigidly, her eyes cold. Cecilia, still fragile, clung to her mother's side. Captain Blake paced, his charm replaced by agitation. Mr. Drake clutched his pocket watch, his face pale. Dr. Hayworth and Clara sat close, their hands intertwined. Craddock held up the letter. "This was found in Mrs. Carver's possession. It suggests she had an accomplice in Sir Henry's murder. I need the truth. Now." A murmur of shock rippled through the room. Captain Blake spoke first, his voice sharp. "An accomplice? That's preposterous. She acted alone. Her confession said so." Miss Marple's voice was gentle but piercing. "Captain Blake, confessions are not always complete. Mrs. Carver admitted to the act, but this letter suggests she was guided. I wonder, did you know of her affair with Sir Henry? Or perhaps you had your own reasons to want him gone?" Blake's face reddened. "I told you, my dealings with Sir Henry were business. I had no part in this." Miss Marple turned to Mr. Drake. "Mr. Drake, you were Sir Henry's solicitor. Did you know of any plans beyond the codicil? A secret agreement, perhaps, with Mrs. Carver or another?" Drake's fingers tightened on his watch. I knew nothing of this letter. Sir Henry's affairs were complex, but I had no role in his death." Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Dr. Hayworth. "Dr. Hayworth, you supplied Mrs. Carver with chloral hydrate under threat. Did she mention another person, someone directing her actions?" Hayworth's face was ashen. She hinted at someone powerful, someone who knew Sir Henry's plans, but she never named them." Clara, trembling, clutched her husband's arm. "Please, we've told you everything. We only wanted to protect ourselves." Miss Marple's needles, now resumed, clicked softly. She thought of the scullery cup, the letter's tone, demeanor, her knowledge of the estate's debts, and her strained relationship with Cecilia. "Lady Margaret," Miss Marple said softly, "you knew Sir Henry's financial troubles intimately. You also knew of his affair with Mrs. Carver, did you not? And perhaps you saw an opportunity to secure the estate's future."
Lady Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You're accusing me, Miss Marple? I loved my husband despite his faults. I had no reason to harm him." Miss Marple's voice was calm but relentless. "Yet the letter suggests a plan, one that ensured Sir Henry's death would protect certain interests. The codicil threatened Cecilia's inheritance, but it also threatened the estate's stability. You, as Lady Margaret, stood to lose everything if the debts were exposed. I wonder if you encouraged Mrs. Carver, promising her security in exchange for her silence." The room fell silent, all eyes on Lady Margaret. Her composure wavered, her hands clenching. "This is absurd," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Miss Marple continued. "The scullery cup was your mistake, Lady Margaret. You helped Mrs. Carver mix the chloral hydrate, but you hid the cup poorly, perhaps hoping it would be found to implicate her alone. The letter, however, betrays your involvement. You knew of her affair and used it to manipulate her." Cecilia gasped, her eyes wide. "Mother, no! It can't be true!" Lady Margaret's face crumpled, her voice a whisper. I only wanted to protect you, Cecilia. Henry's debts would have ruined us. I told Evelyn it would be quick, that no one would suspect her. I didn't touch the dagger, I swear it." Craddock stepped forward, his voice firm. "Lady Margaret, you'll need to come with us to clarify your role. This letter is evidence of conspiracy." As Constable Pork escorted Lady Margaret away, Cecilia sobbed, collapsing into a chair. Miss Marple approached her, her touch gentle. "My dear, the truth is painful, but it frees you. Your mother acted out of fear, but she cannot escape her choices." Dolly, watching in awe, whispered, "Jane, you saw it all. The teacups, the letter, everything. How do you do it?" Miss Marple's smile was serene. "In St. Mary Mead, Dolly, I learned that secrets are never as hidden as they seem. A teacup, a letter, a glance, they tell the story if one listens." Chapter 13. The Unraveling Threads. The afternoon light filtered through the heavy drapes of Greystone Manor, casting a muted glow over the drawing room, where the remaining guests sat in stunned silence. Lady Margaret's confession had shaken the household, her admission of complicity in Sir Henry Ashford's murder, leaving a trail of shock and sorrow. Dolly
"Something we're missing." Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly, her expression calm, but her eyes alert as they scanned the room. "You're quite right, Dolly," she murmured. "The tapestry is nearly complete, but a few threads remain loose. Lady Margaret's role explains much, but not all. The teacup stains, the letter, the open window, they point to a plan, but I wonder if another hand guided it." She thought of Mrs. Thompson in St. Mary Mead, who once confessed to a minor theft only to shield a greater crime. Could Lady Margaret be protecting someone else? Or was there another layer to the conspiracy? Inspector Craddock, his notebook filled with new questions, stood before the group, his face grim. "Lady Margaret has been taken to the station for further questioning," he announced. "She admits to encouraging Mrs. Carver, but insists she did not wield the dagger. We're investigating her claims, but I need your cooperation. If anyone knows more about this plot, speak now." The guests, Captain Roger Blake, Mr. Lionel Drake, Cecilia Ashford, Dr. Thomas Hayworth, and Clara Hayworth, shifted uneasily. Cecilia, her eyes red from crying, clung to a cushion, her voice barely audible. "Mother said she did it for me, but I can't believe she'd go so far." Captain Blake, his charm replaced by a brooding intensity, stared at the floor. Drake's fingers fidgeted with his pocket watch, while Dr. Hayworth and Clara sat close, their faces guarded. Miss Marple's mind returned to the teacup stains, 3 cups,
each marked with chloral hydrate, found in the drawing room, the library, and the scullery. The laboratory had confirmed the sedative's presence, and Mrs. Carver's fingerprints on the scullery cup had sealed her guilt. But Lady Margaret's involvement raised new questions. Why had she hidden the scullery cup so poorly? And why had the letter been left in Mrs. Carver's jewellery box where it could be found? Miss Marple suspected a deeper game, one played by a mind more calculating than either woman's. "Dolly," she whispered, "we must consider the possibility of a third conspirator. Lady Margaret and Mrs. Carver acted together, but someone else may have pulled the strings, using their motives to their own advantage." Dolly's eyes widened. "Jane, you mean someone else in this room? But who? They all seem so shaken." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Shock can be feigned, Dolly. In my village, I once knew a man who wept at a funeral, only to be found later with the stolen silver. We must look closer." Craddock, sensing Miss Marple's quiet intensity, approached her. "Miss Marple, you've been invaluable. Do you have a theory about this accomplice? The letter suggests someone powerful, but Lady Margaret claims she acted alone with Mrs. Carver."
Miss Marple wonder if it was planted to ensure Mrs. Carver's arrest, protecting the true mastermind. "We must examine the motives again. Sir Henry's death benefited someone beyond Lady Margaret and Mrs. Carver." Craddock nodded, turning to the group. "Let's review your connections to Sir Henry. Captain Blake, you had a failed business deal with him. Did you know of Mrs. Carver's affair or Lady Margaret's plans?" Blake's jaw tightened. "I told you my dealings were financial. I didn't know about their schemes. I was in my room that night." Miss Marple's voice was gentle but probing.
"Captain Blake,
"You mentioned seeing a shadowy figure near the garden. Was that a fabrication, or did you see someone, perhaps Mrs. Carver or Lady Margaret?" Blake hesitated, his eyes flicking to Cecilia. It was dark. I might have been mistaken." Miss Marple noted the glance, her thoughts turning to Cecilia's secret lover. Could Blake be involved, protecting her or himself? She turned to Mr. Drake. "Mr. Drake, as Sir Henry's solicitor, you knew of the codicil reducing Cecilia's inheritance. Did you also know of a larger plan, perhaps one involving the estate's debts?" Drake's fingers froze on his watch. "I knew only what Sir Henry told me. The codicil was his idea, to secure the estate through Cecilia's marriage. I had no part in any murder." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "Yet your nervousness suggests knowledge, Mr. Drake. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a man who checked his watch when hiding a secret. What is yours?" Drake's face paled, but he remained silent. Miss Marple turned to Dr. Hayworth and Clara. "Dr. Hayworth, you supplied Mrs. Carver with chloral hydrate under threat. Did she mention another person? Someone who pressured her beyond Lady Margaret?" Hayworth's voice was strained. She spoke of a partner, but never named them. I thought she meant Lady Margaret." Clara, trembling, added, "We only wanted to protect ourselves. Evelyn threatened to expose my past, a foolish mistake from years ago. We had no choice." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. She thought of the letter's tone, intimate yet commanding. It suggested someone with authority, someone who knew the manor's secrets. Her gaze settled on Cecilia, who sat quietly, her eyes haunted. "Cecilia, my dear," she said softly, "you mentioned a secret lover. Was it Captain Blake? And did he know of your father's plans?" Cecilia's face crumpled. "Yes, it's Roger. I told him about father's plan to marry me to Mr. Drake. He was angry, but he wouldn't hurt father." Blake's face darkened. "I didn't.
I loved Cecilia.
Secure Cecilia's inheritance. The scullery cup, poorly hidden, was his mistake, meant to implicate Mrs. Carver alone. "Inspector," Miss Marple said, her voice firm, "I believe Captain Blake is the mastermind. He used Mrs. Carver's affair and Lady Margaret's fear of ruin to orchestrate the murder. He planted the letter to ensure their arrest, knowing Cecilia's inheritance would come to him if they married." Blake leapt to his feet. "This is outrageous. You have no proof." Miss Marple's eyes were steady. "The scullery cup, Captain Blake. You hid it, but not well, hoping it would be found to seal Mrs. Carver's guilt. Your story of a shadowy figure was a lie, designed to distract us. And your love for Cecilia gave you motive to remove Sir Henry and secure her fortune." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Captain Blake, we'll need to search your belongings. If there's evidence tying you to the chloral hydrate or the letter, we'll find it." Blake's face paled, and he bolted for the door, but Constable Pork was faster, restraining him. A search of Blake's room revealed a vial of chloral hydrate, hidden in a tobacco tin. He collapsed, muttering, "I only wanted a future with Cecilia." Cecilia sobbed, her world shattered. Miss Marple approached, her touch gentle. "My dear, love can blind us, but truth heals. You will find your way." Dolly, awestruck, whispered, "Jane, you saw it all, the teacups, the letter, Blake's lies. You're a wonder." Miss Marple's smile was serene. "Merely an old woman, Dolly, who listens to the whispers of human hearts." Chapter 14. The Final Pieces. The evening light cast a soft, melancholy glow over Greystone Manor, its grandeur now tinged with the sorrow of betrayal and loss. The drawing-room, once a stage for polite conversation, was now a place of quiet reckoning, as the guests grappled with the revelations of Captain Roger Blake's role as the mastermind behind Sir Henry Ashford's murder. Dolly Bantry, seated beside Miss Marple, twisted her handkerchief, her face a mix of relief and disbelief. "Jane, I thought Mrs. Carver and Lady Margaret were the end of it," she whispered. "But Captain Blake, to think he used poor Cecilia's love like that, it's monstrous." Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked gently, her expression serene but her eyes sharp as they surveyed the remaining guests. Cecilia Ashford, Mr. Lionel Drake, Dr. Thomas Hayworth, and Clara Hayworth. Lady Margaret and Mrs. Evelyn Carver were in custody, and Captain Blake had been taken to the station after his attempted flight. "Monstrous, yes, Dolly," Miss Marple murmured, but Miss Marple wondered if every motive had been uncovered. Inspector Craddock, his face wary from the day's events, stood before the group, his notebook open. "Captain Blake has confessed to orchestrating the murder," he announced. "He manipulated Mrs. Carver and Lady Margaret, using their motives to eliminate Sir Henry. But we need to clarify the details. Any further secrets could complicate the case. If anyone knows more, speak now." Cecilia, her eyes red and her hands trembling, sat hunched in a chair. "I can't believe Roger did this," she whispered. "He said he loved me, that we'd build a future together. How could I be so blind?" Mr. Drake, his pocket watch now still, cleared his throat. "Inspector, I swear I knew nothing of Blake's plan. Sir Henry's codicil was his idea to secure the estate through Cecilia's marriage. I was only following his instructions." Dr. Hayworth, his arm around Clara, spoke quietly. "We've told you everything. Evelyn blackmailed us for the chloral hydrate, but we didn't know Blake was involved. We were trying to protect Clara's past." Clara nodded, her voice barely audible. "It was a foolish scandal, nothing criminal, but enough to ruin us socially.
We had no choice. Miss Marple's needles paused. She thought of Mrs. Jenkins in St. Mary Mead, who once concealed a minor indiscretion to protect her family, only to find it entangled with a larger crime. The teacup stains, the letter and Blake's vial were clear, but she wondered about Mr. Drake's role. His constant checking of his watch, his evasiveness about the codicil. Could he have known more than he admitted? And Cecilia's love for Blake, had it blinded her to any signs of his scheming? "Inspector," Miss Marple said gently, "may I ask Mr. Drake a question? It concerns the codicil and Sir Henry's intentions." Craddock nodded, his respect for her insight evident. "Go ahead, Miss Marple." Miss Marple's gaze settled on Drake, her voice soft but piercing. "Mr. Drake, you were Sir Henry's solicitor, privy to his financial troubles, and the codicil reducing Cecilia's inheritance. Did you know of Captain Blake's interest in Cecilia, or perhaps a deal he proposed to benefit from the estate?" Drake's face paled, his fingers twitching toward his watch. I knew Cecilia cared for him, but I didn't think it relevant. Sir Henry wanted her to marry me, not Blake. I had no part in any plot." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "Yet your nervousness suggests knowledge, Mr. Drake. In my village I knew a man who checked his watch when hiding a secret. Did Captain Blake approach you, perhaps offering a share of the estate's wealth if you helped him?" Drake's hands trembled, his voice low. He hinted at a deal, yes. After Sir Henry's death, he said Cecilia's inheritance could—
Thought it was just talk. Craddock's eyes narrowed.
"Mr. Drake, you'll need to come to the station for a full statement. Withholding information makes you an accessory." Drake's shoulders slumped, his face ashen.
I didn't mean for this to happen. I only wanted to secure my position. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts turning to Cecilia. "My dear," she said gently, "did Captain Blake ever speak of your father's plans, or suggest a way to change them?" Cecilia's eyes filled with tears. "He said father was wrong to force me into marriage, that we could be together if the codicil was stopped. I thought he meant to talk to father, not this." Miss Marple's voice was kind. "Love blinds us, Cecilia, but it does not excuse betrayal. Captain Blake used your feelings to manipulate everyone, including Mrs. Carver and your mother." Dolly, listening intently, whispered,
"Jane, how did you know Drake was involved? He seemed so peripheral."
Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. "In St. Mary Mead, Dolly, I learned that those who seem peripheral often hold the key. Mr. Drake's watch-checking was a sign of guilt, not just nerves. He knew of Blake's plan, even if he didn't act on it." Craddock, turning to Dr. Hayworth and Clara, pressed further. "Did Mrs. Carver mention Captain Blake when she blackmailed you for the chloral hydrate?" Hayworth hesitated. "She said someone else was involved, someone who'd ensure our silence. I assumed it was Lady Margaret, but now it must have been Blake." Clara nodded, her voice trembling. "Evelyn was terrified of him. She said he had a hold over everyone." Miss Marple's mind raced. Blake's manipulation was the thread that tied the conspiracy together. Mrs. Carver's affair, Lady Margaret's fear of ruin, Drake's ambition and Cecilia's love. The teacup stains were his tool, used to deliver the sedative, but the scullery cup's poor hiding suggested haste, perhaps a moment of panic when he realized Mrs. Carver might betray him. "Inspector," Miss Marple said, "I believe Mr. Drake's confession completes the picture. Captain Blake orchestrated the murder, using Mrs. Carver to administer the chloral hydrate, and Lady Margaret to ensure the plan's secrecy. The teacup stains were his method, but his greed led to his downfall." Craddock nodded, his expression resolute. "We'll ensure all parties are questioned thoroughly.
Miss Marple, your insight has been invaluable. As the guests dispersed, Cecilia approached Miss Marple, her face etched with pain. Miss Marple, how can I go on? My mother, Roger, they've broken my heart. Miss Marple's touch was gentle. My dear, hearts mend, though it takes...
Was serene. In St. Mary Mead, Dolly, I learned that truth is a balm, even when it stings. The teacup stains told their story, and we listened. As they prepared to leave once more, Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction. The case was nearly closed, but she knew one final reflection was needed to ensure every question was answered. The manor's secrets were laid bare, but human nature, as always, would continue to weave new puzzles. Chapter 15. The Quiet Departure. The morning sun broke through the lingering mist around Greystone Manor, casting a golden warmth over the estate that seemed to promise renewal after days of darkness. The drawing room, where so much tension had unfolded, was now quiet, its grandeur softened by the departure of most guests. Dolly Bantry, seated beside Miss Marple on the plush sofa, sipped her tea, her nerves finally settling.
Jane, it's over at last, she said, her voice a mix of relief and wonder. Mrs. Carver, Lady Margaret, Captain Blake, Mr. Drake, all caught in their own web. I still can't believe you unraveled it with those teacup stains.
Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly, a lavender cardigan a familiar sight as she folded her work into her bag. Not unraveled, Dolly, she murmured, her eyes twinkling faintly. Merely followed the threads to their source. The teacup stains were a whisper of truth, and we listened. Her mind traced the case's intricacies, the 3 cups marked with chloral hydrate, the open library window, the unsigned codicil, the hidden letter, and the web of motives weaving greed, love, and fear. Each clue had led to the revelation of Captain Blake as the mastermind, with Mrs. Carver, Lady Margaret, and Mr. Drake as his unwitting pawns. Inspector Craddock, his investigation concluded, joined them in the drawing room, his face weary but satisfied. Miss Marple, he said, his tone warm with admiration, you've turned this case on its head. Captain Blake's full confession confirms everything. Mrs. Carver administered the sedative, Lady Margaret planned the cover-up, and Mr. Drake knew of Blake's scheme but stayed silent for his own gain. The teacup stains were the linchpin, just as you said. Miss Marple inclined her head modestly. I am but an old woman, Inspector, with a habit of noticing small things. In St. Mary Mead, I learned that a stain, a glance, a misplaced word, they tell stories the guilty cannot hide. Dolly leaned forward, her curiosity unabated.
Jane, tell us how you pieced it all together. I was sure Cecilia was involved, or even Dr. Hayworth, but you saw through it all.
Miss Marple's smile was gentle. Cecilia was a victim of her heart, Dolly, much like young Mary in my village, who loved unwisely but
3 cups, each with chloral hydrate, scattered to confuse us. Mrs. Carver used one to drug Sir Henry. Lady Margaret hid another in the scullery, and Captain Blake planted the 3rd near Cecilia to shift suspicion. Their plan was clever, but human nature is careless.
Craddock nodded, flipping through his notebook.
Blake admitted he manipulated them all. Mrs. Carver's affair, Lady Margaret's fear of financial ruin, Drake's ambition. He thought Cecilia's inheritance would secure his future. The letter in Mrs. Carver's jewelry box was his insurance, meant to implicate her if things went wrong. Miss Marple's eyes softened. And that was his mistake. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a man who hid a letter to protect himself, only to reveal his guilt. Captain Blake underestimated the teacup stains, thinking them insignificant. But small things, Inspector,
are the loudest when one listens.
The remaining guests, Cecilia, Dr. Hayworth and Clara, entered the room, their faces heavy with the weight of recent events. Cecilia approached Miss Marple, her eyes still red but resolute.
Miss Marple, she said, her voice trembling, I don't know how to thank you. You saved me from suspicion. And though Mother and Roger, I'll never understand why they did it. But I'm free now.
Miss Marple's touch was gentle as she took Cecilia's hand.
My dear, you have strength you've yet to discover. Greystone Manor is yours to rebuild, and you will do so with honesty. Love betrayed you, but it will not define you.
Dr. Hayworth, his arm around Clara, added, We owe you our gratitude too. If you hadn't uncovered Blake's role, we might still be under suspicion. Clara's past is safe now. Clara nodded, her voice soft.
I was so afraid, but you saw the truth. Thank you.
Miss Marple's smile was kind. Fear makes us vulnerable, Mrs. Hayworth, but truth sets us free. You and your husband can start anew. As the guests prepared to leave, Mr. Drake lingered, his face etched with shame. Miss Marple, I should have spoken sooner. I let greed cloud my judgment. Miss Marple's gaze was steady, but not unkind. We all falter, Mr. Drake. In my village, I knew a man who kept silent for profit, but he made amends. You can too. Craddock escorted the group to the hall, where bags were packed and farewells exchanged. Cecilia, now the mistress of Greystone Manor, stood at the door, her posture straighter despite her grief. I'll sell what's needed to clear the debts, she said to Craddock. The manor will survive, and so will I. Miss Marple, perhaps, Dolly, but also fascinating. In St. Mary Mead, I see the same patterns: love, greed, fear, hope. They weave the human story, and I am merely a reader picking out the stitches. The teacup stains were but one chapter, and there will always be another. The car pulled away, Greystone Manor fading into the distance. Dolly sighed, her tension easing. You make it sound almost poetic, Jane. But I'm glad to be going home. No more murders, please. Miss Marple chuckled softly. Oh, Dolly. Life is never so predictable, but for now, a cup of tea in St. Mary Mead will do nicely. As the countryside rolled by, Miss Marple gazed out the window, her mind already drifting to the quiet rhythms of her village. The case of the teacup stains had been solved, its secrets laid bare by her patient observation, yet she knew with a quiet certainty that human nature would always offer new mysteries, waiting for an attentive eye to unravel them. She closed her eyes, content, as the car carried her home to the familiar comforts of St. Mary Mead, where the next story, no doubt, was already brewing.